Craig. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Catalyst webinar series presented by the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA. The Catalyst webinar series is a bi-weekly educational platform for creating success and change in your club and career. Lots of exciting things going on. We've developed kind of a tradition here where each year, I've been fortunate enough to be hosting the Catalyst webinar for the last 4 years. And every January when we kick off the Catalyst webinar series for the year, Craig Kessler from the SCPGA Director of Public Affairs has been generous and kind enough to come on and present as our first Catalyst presenter of that year. And this year's no different. Craig has been kind enough to dedicate his morning to presenting this morning. Very relevant time for us with AB 672 and everything that's been going on with that. Good morning, Craig. Happy New Year and welcome to the Catalyst webinar series.
Good morning, John. Good morning to everyone who listens, and thank you for inviting me on. One of these years, maybe things will be so quiet in the public arena that you can invite someone else on instead of me. But unfortunately, that hasn't been the case in recent years, and particularly this year. So thanks for inviting me on. And this is we were commenting a little bit among ourselves that half of the audience under a certain age probably won't understand the title snapshot. But look it up in a very dust off a dictionary. Oops, I just dated myself again. So we better move on to the second slide before I get into even more trouble here this morning by dating myself. But I'm confident. I know Tom Addis is with us, and he understands every old reference I make. So that always comforts me. So today's presentation is going to actually contain more slides than I ordinarily use. So I hope I don't screw that up and talk too long on some of the slides. But going to break it up into sort of 3 sections. Going to sort of briefly look back really on the last 2 sessions and talk about some of the things which I'll call pretty much, I think, accomplishments on behalf of the golf industry. They weren't necessarily easy. AB 1346 is probably the one you know the least about, but it's still impactful. And then we're going to spend much of this presentation looking immediately forward. And really, we're in the hot moment of Assembly Bill 672, which at the SCPGA we call the Public Golf Endangerment Act. We were originally going to call it the Extinction Act, but that was considered a little bit too harsh and maybe a touch misleading. And then, of course, touch on the subject, which is always before us, although in the last couple of weeks, Mother Nature has maybe softened some of these blows in the short run. And that's the whole water issue, which has been with us for a long time, will be with us for a long time, and shows all the signs of becoming as endemic as COVID-19. And then I'm going to close with looking forward a little bit on a longer term that draws some of these issues together because they're all related, whether it's municipal golf, water access and cost, or some of the ways in which we reactively respond to these issues. They're, like I said, endemic, and they're all really related to the same source, and that's our encumbrance of land. And that's why I raise it to the level of an existential challenge, because 2 things about golf. We have to play it on turf, and it has certain biological needs, and we need a lot of acreage, maybe not as much as we used to. We're working on that. But still, compared to other activities and particularly other sports and with which we're in competition or other uses, we take up a lot of land. So let's dive right into it now. That's a clue because I'm not handling the slides. So they come up with a lot of different ways to indicate that we're changing slides. Bear with me. It's just one of the things we need to do. And I forgot to mention, I hope to leave enough time at the end for any questions, and I'll leave it up to John to handle some of those questions. So I'm going to briefly go through one of the issues that really captured a lot of our attention in addition to AB 672. In fact, the other one on a legislative or a statewide nature, and that was Assembly Bill 1346. It was a bill in the legislature to direct the California Air Resources Board, I'm going to call that CARD from now on to save a little bit of oxygen, to adopt a rule that would phase out by date certain the sale of gas-powered equipment under 25 horsepower. That's a lot of equipment in the golf industry. The media focused, and many of us focused on blowers because those are used domestically, but it's also a lot of lawn mowers, chainsaws, a number of things that are used in golf courses, and a number of things that are used particularly by the mom and pop landscaping industry. And as part of the green revolution, as part of reducing carbon footprints, this is the wave of California's future. So what we did was we were able to get a meeting with the author of the bill, Mark Berman of Menlo Park, and indicate that we're not crazy. We understand where California is going and recognize that while there may be some industries and certainly some individuals as citizens that want to rail against these particular fates, there are certain areas, maybe not 672, that's a different matter, in which we try to go with the flow and go with the softest of landing. So meeting with the author, we indicated, of course, we support the move. And we added that as a golf industry, we've always supported investing the resources necessary. We support it publicly, maybe privately, we shed a few tears. Whether it's in reducing our water footprint by coming up with the latest and greatest in irrigation technology, or in this particular case, moving from gas-powered equipment to battery-powered equipment. However, as consumers of this, we want to make sure when we can't buy it, that what we're buying in terms of battery-powered alternatives are fit for intended commercial use. That, in other words, that's legalese for make sure that we can buy something that works, even if it's more expensive. Those costs will come down as the technology improves. And so we know sometimes the California Air Resource Board is usually populated with true believers in environmentalism, and they generally have absolute confidence that if they just set a mandate, American companies and technology can meet it. We don't know. That's a little above our pay grade. We're golfers, or whether we're golf course superintendents or just golfers or golf professionals or GMs, or anything where we work in the industry, we have no idea about the manufacturing technologies. So we wanted to make sure it worked, and we of course, lobbied for some rebate programs. Well, the office was very amenable to both, included it in the legislation, and then once the legislation passed, and this went through in record time and signed by the governor, we did work. All of the golf organizations worked with the California Air Resources Board to implement those two wrinkles into the rule, and they are in there. So there's an annual review leading up to the January 1, 2024 date that involves most of the equipment. There's a 2028 date for large equipment or certain generators, but I'm not sure those are used in the golf industry. So that'll be reviewed to make sure the stuff works on a year-to-year basis, and we'll keep our hand involved in that. And there is a rebate program, which only starts out at $30 million. We made clear that's inadequate. They all agreed, but an agency doesn't have the ability to appropriate money, but the legislature does. And our sense is that the legislature will in each year appropriate more and more money. I'm very skeptical of the golf industry's ability to tap those rebates, because this is really meant for the massive numbers of what I would call mom and pop landscapers who put things on trucks and go from house to house to house. And just imagine how difficult it is to keep those batteries recharged, particularly during the summer. I think they'll have access, but at some level, we may be able to get it as well. So they have an open dialogue with the agency. They were very open to meeting with us. I would call this a success. I'm sure a few of you listening will not find anything which further regulates our industry a success, but I'm a realist, and as a citizen, you have the ability to just simply exercise your opinion. And that was a clue that we're gonna kind of flip the script and go to another slide. There's always a gap in there. That's why I have to say it. Because of the audience listening in today, I feel also, even though this was 2 years ago, not last year, that whether it's AB 2257 or AB 5, and I hope everyone noticed the news a couple of days ago that Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego, the author of the bill, has left the legislature. We knew she was going to leave, but we didn't think it would be till the middle of the year. She's taking over the Labor Federation job. Art Pulaski is retiring. And I will simply say that that's a great job for her. She will be a warrior on behalf of organized labor in California. That is her passion. And so, and I have to add, even though she's been portrayed in the media as, well, various things that are not flattering, she did work very, very cooperatively with the golf industry on carving carving a business to business for professional services exception into AB 5 and its successor bill 2257 that pretty much, for all intents and purposes, maybe not 100%, but about 96%, allows for independent contracting PGA teaching professionals, which we sold to her, and I think our passion for it was not just a better life for PGA professionals, but also it was key to quality teaching at public golf, particularly municipal golf facilities. You know, the SCGA does a lot of these surveys, and we ask persons, you know, why do you play golf? Why do you play more golf? Would you play more golf if? And the top two finishers in that last question, would you play more golf? The answer is always if I played better and if I had people to play with. Well, if I played better, that's the bailiwick of the PGA. You teach the game, you make us all better. That's the theory. I've been going to teachers for years, and most of them require a non-disclosure agreement when they give me a lesson, but that's another story. And of course, an amateur section puts people together in clubs. Sometimes those clubs are things like the Los Angeles Country Clubs, or I will throw in South Hills Country Club too. And oftentimes it's just 18 men and women who work at a local post office or something that go and play every couple of weeks at a different public golf course where they hold tournaments and events. It's all really the same thing. So that's why this was so important to us. And we spent a lot of time working it. And I've listed here the three major improvements that we managed. We got something into AB 5, but then more improvements on in 2257. And I won't necessarily go in. You can read the details. As I mentioned, it creates the pathway for independent contracting. It included youth sports coaches, which is extremely important to the SCGA, youth on course, first tee programs, the PGAs, junior, all those kinds of things, because that's a niche of the game in which is almost totally dependent on this particular category. And if they all had to be employees with full benefits, it would pretty much tank our business model. And then there were amendments that cured a number of the things we initially found in AB 5 that were a bit problematic. So listed in here, the following changes are reflective of the improvement. AB 5's original requirement regarding separate business locations has been replaced by the ability to maintain a residence as that separate business location. So a PGA professional didn't have to have an office. You could be running your business and your book out of your home. AB 5's original contract requirement that the independent contract with other businesses to provide the same or similar services has been replaced by the mere ability to contract with other businesses to provide those same services. And then the new test prong 6 makes clear in a way that the old test did not, that the provider of the professional services may be engaged in independently established business of the same nature as that involved in the work performed. Obviously, we made much of the fact that if you're an accountant, a lawyer, a consultant, even if you're a public affairs director, you can run everything you do. You can run it out of your bedroom. But a golf professional, you're going to need a golf course or a large field. Remember, I talked about that existential problem, the land we encumber. It's involved in it as well. And that just happens to be a fact or a reality. And I think that was something that Assemblymember Gonzalez understood, and I think the legislature understood. There's still one little minor problem with it, which we're going to hope, and that's also a clue to flip the panel. Always that slight gap. There is one prong, and this is it, an exception that continues to bother us. We had hoped to take it up in the last session, but for most of the year, the legislature was closed. I mean, they were working out of their homes as the staffers. You can't walk the halls. All the energy and bandwidth was taken up with two things, with COVID, and then ultimately taken up with how to spend that surplus that came in totally unexpectedly. This is it. And put it down on there, and well, I'm not going to read it because I don't understand it. Nobody understands it. And our problem is less that it causes problems than that we can't figure out what it means, and which makes it a problem. So we'd like to work, if this session, the Omicron variant is bubbling, we have no idea where we're going. We know we're going to keep playing golf, but we have no idea where we're going in terms of getting back to the usual course of business in Sacramento. So we'll see if we get to it. The good news is we can have independent contract teaching for the most part without getting to this, but we will take it up. And that's all I'll say about that. There's just a slight piece of unfinished business, and I'm optimistic about finishing it, but we'll finish it when they have sufficient bandwidth. No report of this nature could be, it would be complete without some mention of COVID. I'm sure everyone, the golf industry was spectacular. This is one of our shining moments dealing with COVID, shining moments nationally and shining moment in California, where we actually moved more quickly, at least in the southern part of the state, to get back to playing golf before our large organizations issued their back to golf protocols and so forth, which helped a lot of golf in parts of the nation that maybe are not as sophisticated with advocacy as we are here in California. But nonetheless, this was a shining example. We were able to make our case and play golf. I want to assure everybody that even with Omicron spreading, and that's going to strain emergency services. If you read today's front pages of every paper, it's straining hospitals. It's certainly causing problems. But unless there is a variant that is vaccine resistant, which doesn't seem to be likely, but again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not sure what my opinion is worth. I'm just reading what a lot of the opinions of a lot of doctors. That's highly unlikely. Golf that we've been playing from almost the beginning of the pandemic will continue unabated. Now, there's certain things within clubhouses that are problematic, and that's so we're not fully functional, but compared to other sectors, we're far more functional than the rest of them. And the fact that I think the National Golf Foundation's decided nationally, our business remains 22% up over 2019, which was up over 2018. So we were starting to grow again in 2018, 2019. And of course, we all expected we would tank during COVID, but it looks like it's about a 22% bonus. And we obviously we'd love to keep that moving forward. So that's enough about COVID. I'm tired of talking. Everyone's tired of COVID. We can't wait for it to go away, but I think it will not. So this is the meat of what faces us today. And if you're a member of the SCGA, you're getting these things constantly asking you to get engaged with your own legislators. And Tom Addis is on the phone, and we were having a brief conversation. We know we've been scrambling. This bill comes up for hearing in two committees next week on the same day, two different committees, Housing and Public Community Development, as well as Local Government Committee, where we think it will get even a worse reception. And the bill is, the formal title is Conversion of Publicly Owned Golf Courses to Affordable Housing. And you see this language right here that I clumsily pointed to, and which I'm told you're not supposed to do on Zoom, in the Zoom presentation, in bold. But we had to change that because literally this bill, which was filed a year ago, has had so many different iterations and so many different amendments. And it had an amendment literally within an hour or two after the legislature went back into session at 1 o'clock on Monday. And this is now the opening of bill. We decided to name it Public Golf Endangerment Act because we wanted to, sort of give it a name that people would understand that, hey, this one is serious, this one is scary. This is not the usual behind scenes stuff that we do, whether it's AB 1346. Even this audience may be quite aware of everything that we had done with AB 5 and 2257 because it was so viscerally personal to all of you. But for the most part, it was done out of public view, behind scenes, and within the normal order. This has been an exception. This is now the opening language of the bill as it was amended on Monday. And I'm just going to read it. And it's scary enough. Existing law establishes the Department of Housing and Community Development and requires it to, among other things, administer various programs intended to fund the acquisition of property to develop or preserve affordable housing. This bill would, upon appropriation by the legislature, key phrase, require the department to administer a program to provide incentives in the form of grants to local agencies that enter into a development agreement to convert a golf course owned by the local agency into housing and publicly accessible open space as specified. And the as specified follows in the next 3.5 pages that constitute the entirety of the bill as it's amended and as it will be heard next Wednesday morning by the Housing and Community Development Committee, and then later that afternoon by the Local Government Committee. Bottom line here, and let's sort of flip the, as you can see on some of these things, I've included some of the SCGA's collateral about it, and I'll get into that a little bit different. We've targeted, bottom line is that it's a developer's bill. I call it a developer's bill masquerading as a housing bill, but it's becoming increasingly clear, I think, to objective observers that this, as it's been honed down from a sort of a blunderbuss originally a year, or actually in February of 2021, to where it is today, it's pretty clear there's probably one or two local agencies, otherwise known as municipal governments, and probably one developer, and they have their eye on one or two facilities, and they want to get public money to sort of grease the deal, because whether it's this iteration or the other, and something we're held back at the moment, we believe it violates an existing 51-year-old law now called the Park Preservation Act that explicitly makes unlawful precisely what this bill, the aim of this bill is proposes to do, which is to take a park and turn it into a housing complex. So, but we'll wait on that, and that's not a self-executing law. That's just something I throw in as a backdrop to indicate that there are a lot of different steps here to the degree to which this moves through the system, and I'll get to that in just a moment. We've tagged it as the most damaging bill against the golf industry in 2 generations because so many of the things we deal with, I mean, whether it's gas-powered equipment, independent contracting certainly affected hundreds of sectors in California, whether we deal with land use issues or wage issues or workplace issues, it affects all workplaces. It isn't aimed at golf, and it's inappropriate for us to make a huge response. We often make common cause with us, and sometimes just step back and allow much more powerful interests, perhaps, to carry some of our interests without, because they have more clout, obviously, and we don't want to always be seen as in the right corner somewhere whining about things. But this one singles out golf and only golf. Does not take a soccer field, a baseball diamond, a park, an equestrian center, a nature center, an arboretum, any of the land conservancies, which are enormous in the state, or any of the property that the state of California owns over 1 million acres, which it keeps as open space. And I'm not suggesting those aren't good ideas. In fact, they're good ideas to maintain those things. But this one takes golf and in essence makes a legislative finding that 22% of our stock in the state, a little over 1 over 5 golf courses, are owned by local agencies, in other words, governments. And it in essence, read them out of that community and simply state that make a finding that in California, we don't think they belong and they should be chopped up into some other. And this becomes a slippery slope. I believe a slippery slope towards chopping up other park and open space activities. And one of the ironies is that the ones that are in danger really politically are not those where there are a lot of parks, not those communities with a lot of parks and open spaces, in other words, more affluent communities, but it's going to be precisely in those communities which have been identified incessantly as park poor and often make the complaint that they don't have enough parks. So this bill would in essence close those green spaces, because we need to understand, when I get to the existential challenge, there are even those of us in the golf industry that look at a municipal golf course and we don't see it as a park. We don't identify as a park. We've caused a lot of damage to ourselves by doing that, because in essence, we've participated in coming to the moment in which a legislator, and there are others, there's a certain political component in the state of California that doesn't think we're that way. And that makes us very, very vulnerable. And you can see that in the fact that this bill was even filed and is even getting a hearing is an indicator that we have a lot of work to do on our hands. It's a direct shot. I keep referring to, golf's blood is in Sacramento's water. I don't know what's going to happen, but we determined, I think all of us together, and the SCGA took the lead, is that we needed, for the first time, we needed to engage golfers. That legislators in all 80 assembly districts in this state needed to hear that in their communities, that there are people who play golf and consider this and consider it important to their communities. Now, it's obvious, and I'll get to this a little bit later, that Golf is important to golfers, but only roughly 10% of the population plays golf, which, by the way, nowhere near 10% of the population plays tennis or soccer or baseball or rides horses or swims in public pools. The truth of the matter is, where the studies have been done, and the most recent one was done in the city of Los Angeles, their municipal golf courses are the number one most utilized of all their park functions. By the way, tennis is the least utilized and everything else is in between, but golf is number one. And that's not a fact that we've touted out there. If you talk to many persons who don't play golf, they would think golf courses are mostly empty, they're sleepy, they're not used, they're not important. The truth is they're used more than these other things, which are not being attacked in the bill. Again, a lot of work for us to do, and it's encouraging when the work is simply to tell the truth of the matter. That's always advantageous over having to make stuff up, like a lot of sectors have to do, and something we scrupulously avoid. But I think we haven't gotten those messages out there, and we need to get off our backsides and do that. And I'll talk a little bit about that later in this presentation as well. So this is a 2-year bill because it was filed last year, which means everything's going to happen fast. We've prepared everyone to suggest that even those legislators who may ultimately vote on a floor of no may vote to pass it in committee as a courtesy to the author, or just to move it along, and again, in a quickly expedited form. I need to point out that the author, Christina Garcia, who's a Democrat who lives in Bell Gardens, and that's roughly where her district is in Southeast LA County, has decided to leave her seat at the end of 2022 in order to pursue the new 42nd congressional district seat. Her contest is against somebody else named Garcia. So it's been interesting confusion, Garcia versus Garcia. Mayor Robert Garcia of Long Beach was the first to announce for that congressional seat, and she was the second to announce. And they're both heavyweights, so I don't know who else will announce, and who knows, maybe even a Republican will announce, although a Republican has no shot to win the district. So if I had to predict at this particular time, I think everyone gives Mayor Robert Garcia the edge in the race. We had hoped, because this announcement was made before the session started on Monday, that this may dim Christina Garcia's enthusiasm for continuing to press this bill, but apparently it didn't, as evidenced by the fact that she's amended it yet again. And I want to sort of qualify what I'm about to say. With each amendment, it becomes a much better bill. I don't mean a better bill in the sense that I like it. I mean a better bill in the sense that it becomes more dangerous, because badly crafted bills that you're against are much easier and much easier to punch holes into them. But this is a very well crafted bill. It's really honed it down to golf. It's eliminated a lot of problems that came up during other iterations. So it's in a form that's about as amenable to passage as more amenable than it has been. So that makes our job a little bit harder, because at the bottom line, you can read through all the mumbo jumbo in the language. It's still a bill that creates an incentive for a developer and a local agency to get together, and both can profit by taking the municipal golf course and turning it into a housing complex. I want to indicate to all of you who talk about, well, what about the jobs and the revenue and the income that golf generates? I want to disabuse you of that notion. Golf, it doesn't matter what form of golf course it is. It can be Pebble Beach or Torrey Pines, even Torrey Pines, which I think made a $10 million profit last year. Golf is not a high and particularly good use economically of any of that much property, no matter what, which is why when we got together in the California Alliance for Golf, we're not going with that argument, because if that's the argument, what provides more taxes, what provides more jobs, what provides more economic multiplier activity, it's not golf. We lose that battle. So golf as open space, as environmentally valuable, as something that reduces the heat in hot climates in California, as carbon sequesters, as recreation providers, as open space, as green space, all of those things it can win. When that's the issue, it becomes a winner, and that's the issue upon which we've kind of staked our claim here in doing it. Let's flip the script here and go to the next page, because we're going to be on this quite a bit. So I've listed some things here, and obviously the SCPGA has connected into the SCGA campaign. A lot have. I want to point out that we've had constant web presence, multiple email blasts to members. Some of them are getting sick of it. We're getting amazing opening rates on those, by the way. We've included in e-revisions, Club Digest, SCGA News. The sections have put it out. It's traveled to First T chapters in the state, Youth on Course, a Northern California presence with 35,000 member or person database has done blasts. All the organizations in the state have filed organizational letters. We think our ability to track exactly what people do with these emails isn't quite as sophisticated as, let's say, as the Sierra Club and the National Resources Defense Council, because they're advocacy organizations. We're still a golf organization for the most part. That's what we do. We just haven't invested as much in the technology. But near as we can tell, many thousands of persons in this state have taken the time to send an email or a letter to their legislator. One of the things we can't track, but we anecdotally, Kevin Fitzgerald and I, and I'm sure others in the state are able to glean, is that a lot of people play golf. And a lot of them, for example, I commented on someone who knew his legislator, Richard Bloom, and I'm not going to name the person, and they spoke about this directly. There was someone in San Diego who was on a very substantial community college board who knows a couple of legislators who plays golf and made that conversation. There's all kinds of, you'd be surprised, you put out something like this, and we know, we've been aware that some of our members who play golf who are also in the building industry, and from their perspective, in a way that we don't understand because we're in the golf industry, they find it a stupid bill from that perspective. It didn't seem to make any sense to them. And they wrote some interesting letters and emails that have in other words, we, the SCPGA or the SCG, has no credibility to talk about housing policy. What do we know? That's just not what we do. But they do, and they have. So we're hoping, this has been an interesting experiment. And I think it's shocked a lot of us at the SCGA, the open rates and the interests of our members, because I think a few years ago, persons would have said, I don't think golfers are interested in public policy. And I'm hoping, and I say at the SCGA, and I say this for the SCPGA, we only really do these kinds of things when we think it is going to interest them. So we never put out a general email about AB 1346 or even AB 5 for that matter. We put out localized ones to those audience which indicated interest. And we have, I don't know, 1,300 persons who are regular subscribers to SCGA, what is now called Public Affairs Updates. And but they're people who have identified themselves as having great appetites for this. But we don't hit 150,000 or 180,000 persons with everything. But we hit them with this. And maybe the fact that we don't do it, and we did it in this instance, caught their attention that this might be important. And that's something to keep in the mind going forward. Although it's my fondest hope that we don't have to face this very often and that we're not doing this much going forward. But I've listed the links and kind of given to you the campaign that we undertook here. And we did the campaign, and I'm giving you the collateral that's we put out. But much of the stuff that we've done is we produced for anyone else, for all other organizations to use. So all you had to do is take what we put out and stick your own logo on the top, because this is not about the SCGA. This is about golf, and this is about, we hope, winning this battle, and about making clear, and again, like I said in the previous slide or a moment ago, that politics knows no principle more than whose blood is in the water. And if your blood is in the water, they're going to keep coming at you. And there's a reason why, and occasionally when speaking face to face, I've often made the following comment. You know, if the issue is housing, I believe all 1,000 golf facilities in the state of California could physically fit within the entirety of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, which is almost entirely within the city limits of Los Angeles. And and have plenty of room left over for scrub oaks and squirrels. And so why are we going after this minuscule amount of property? And it's only 22% of that to boot. And of course, their eyes widen because no one in their right mind would suggest that, because it would end their political career. That blood's not in the water. Other blood is not in the water. You have to take seriously when someone who's a serious politician, and Christina Garcia is a serious politician with a serious following and serious ambitions, And this is not a wacky idea it's a bad idea to be sure, but it's not a wacky idea in the sense that everyone scratches their head and says, well, what is she thinking? This is an idea that's, popular with enough persons that ought to cause us. And when they do that and think they can put this forward, that should be a loud and clear signal that your blood is in the water, you're not organized, you're not protected, and you're not defended. That's the calculation they made. And that's the pitch I make to you, and that's the pitch we've made to all of our members, that we better respond, or this will not, for a lot of reasons I'll get to in the last slide in this conversation, or this monologue actually, there will be repercussions moving forward. So let's flip out of this SCGA campaign and see what else we have on. Well, that was it. So I'm not. You can look at water, but I'm going to continue to talk about 672 for a couple of more moments and indicate that don't be flummoxed if it passes out of the committees. It may even pass out of its House of Origin by the end of this month. It will then go to the Senate, where it will have to sit for a much longer period of time. And we have more arguments in our arsenal to deal with it. I don't know whether it's a little bit, we're in slightly in uncharted waters here, but I'm more optimistic than pessimistic that ultimately this will not be signed into law. But for that to come to, my optimism is based on the fact that I'm putting confidence in golf's ability to stay this particular course and not just fly off with a number of emails and say, well, we sent 7,000 to 8,000 emails and they didn't listen to us. And I might add that that's kind of the nature. You need to just keep going with it because this is sufficiently important, in the history of our game. Because many of you listening may say that, well, John Kulo is GM at South Hills Country Club. Well, Country Club's not a public golf course. That's to be sure. Although I guess if everyone's a PGA professional, you realize you may work at a public facility today, a private tomorrow, and a public again after that. But the whole ecosystem of golf is highly dependent on precisely the facilities that would be put in jeopardy by this law. We already know those are under a great deal of squeeze right now. Without this bill, they've been put in jeopardy. Without the beginning facilities, as you take a look, Torrey Pines isn't going anywhere, neither is Rancho, neither is Harding Park in San Francisco. But even those golf courses and most of the private clubs are sort of up in the chain of an ecosystem, which begins with, Van Buren, driving range out in the middle of Riverside, which is where Kevin Fitzgerald started playing as a little kid and ended up being a medalist in the state amateur. And then ultimately, fate worse than death stuck working for me. But nonetheless, so much of the story, and one of the things that I've always done when I have a lot of occasion to sit, whether it's with a finance committee or a green committee or just a board of some very, exclusive private clubs, I'll ask, well, how did you get to this particular point? Almost none of them were to the country club born. A few maybe, but almost none of them. Their story usually goes, well, when I was 24, I drove by the Rec Park 9 in Long Beach and they were giving lessons. And I thought, maybe that's something I should take up. 40 years later, they end up on the board of a Virginia country club or something like that. And all it amounts to is if you're introduced to a game at a time in life, and a lot of it, we put so much emphasis on look what I'm talking to, the PGA section has invested massive resources. So have all of us in junior league and all the junior programs and all the junior tours and and SCGA Junior Foundation is dedicated literally to introducing golf in communities that otherwise would never be introduced to it. All of those facilities, we believe over 90% of all that activity occurs at precisely the golf courses that are put in jeopardy by AB 672. Those go away. Would we immediately notice it in a year or two or three? Probably not. But all the effort we put into building the game, growing the game in the future, or I'll just put it a little bit more colloquially. It's hard to grow a game if you don't have anywhere to grow it. And that's what's in jeopardy here. And that's what, I'm going to preach a little bit now, and that's what we need to take dead seriously. whether you are a member of, San Francisco Golf Club or La Jolla Country Club, I'm just picking North and South, or you simply play a muni every weekend, this is important to you. Anyway, I think I'll get back to 672 before we go off the air here, but water, we're supposed to be in a La Nina. Much like, I think, the famous comment of William Goldman about Hollywood, nobody knows anything. I think we've discovered that with epidemiology, no one really knows anything, particularly when it's a novel coronavirus. We learn things with each day, but we don't really know anything. When it comes to weather patterns, I think that much is pretty clear too. We've been told we were headed for a dry year, which we may be. I've got to point out that 2014 was also a very wet December, and then January, February, March were the driest on record. So we don't know what's going to happen, but we do know that the snow and the rain that fell in December is bankable. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but we know what happened yesterday, and that was good. But I think we need to pay attention. The kinds of things that draw my attention is a report that came out a few days ago that because we're about to execute the agreement with Arizona, California, and Nevada to take much less water off the Colorado River to keep Lake Mead from dropping below the levels necessary to generate electricity. And that one of the frightening statistics was that actually last year in the Colorado Basin, they had roughly 100% of the normal snowfall, which generated only 32% of the normal runoff. That's increasingly what's behind. You're probably like me. You get a little irritated every story you read after your home floods. Don't worry, that didn't break the drought, or we have longer term problems. And what they're really getting at, other than being cloyingly aggravating by reminding us of this, is that the climate is warmer and it's drier. And it means that even when you have record rains and snows, the ground is parched and it's going to absorb a lot of it. And our aquifers in many places in the state are depleted. So it goes down into that. It's not really the subsurface bounty that we normally get off of it. And that less of precipitation, and that's certainly what happened in the Colorado Basin, comes as snow. And then because it's drier, supposedly, I'm not a climatologist nor a scientist, but more of it evaporates than ends up in liquid water that we can then capture later. And that's just a fact. And so we know that so much of the way in which we store water and keep it longer term in California, particularly in Southern California, is dependent upon something that was very, very stable for a lot of periods of years. And now we're entering a new era in which it's still stable, but it's stable at a much less productive level, which means that we're going to be going into even though yesterday the state finally got off the dime because we approved the bonds and is going to build the site's reservoir, the first one since 1979. But that may be the last above surface reservoir that we build in the state because of the worry that you can build a reservoir, but if there's no water to put in it, what have you done except to spend a lot of money on something that's useless? Wouldn't be the first time the government's done that, however. So we're going into new things like stormwater capture, aquifer recharge, desalination. Those things are expensive. Now, it's very interesting because reading in some accounts today, there are some ideas floating in Sacramento that we get away from funding some of these rather expensive new storage techniques, not entirely through ratepayers, but that through the collective. A little bit, some of the things that we've sort of pressed in successfully, the golf industry in the Coachella Valley, instead of just having the ratepayer beneficiaries of things like the Mid-Valley Pipeline pay for it out of their rates, because that can get pretty onerously expensive over time, that it's actually in the collective good to an entire community benefits to the degree to which agriculture can grow things and sell things, and that tourism can do things. And of course, in a place like the Coachella Valley, the golf industry is central to the economy. So those are some encouraging things moving forward. And one of the reasons for those of you who pay that much attention to what we do in public policy and golf, why we were warm towards Measure W in Los Angeles County, because the way that, yes, it was a surcharge on everyone's property tax bill, but it was only on those surfaces that were impermeable. So for a golf, so it was almost designed with golf courses in mind to be equitable and fair. And I can tell you that there are some things, some tax proposals, which are quite the opposite. So when we see one that is actually, because we know we're going to go in these directions, these things are inevitable. When we see something that's actually fair to the golf industry, because the golf course proper itself is not, it doesn't create the runoff. It actually does a lot of positive things for the environment. I didn't mean to get into that level of detail, but I want to indicate to everyone that even though if this winter keeps up, yeah, we'll get a breather, and we need a breather in the golf industry. But longer term, drought, water conservation is going to be important. And in terms of positioning ourselves moving forward, it's important that we make clear that yes, we can shout from the rooftops that we have been extremely good, and we should shout from the rooftops in making the investments necessary in really sophisticated irrigation equipment, turf removal, and various other things. We have substantially reduced our water footprint. But if we come across as smug about that, that will not be wise politically. We need to point to that and say, we're going to continue that trajectory, and we're going to do it further and faster. And then that will play a lot better. And whether we can meet, and I hope we're able to meet that, we will do our best. But the funny thing is, I think if we set the goal, we'll probably have a better chance of making it. But I want to indicate that there are things in the works that those stories you read, which again can be a little bit irritating because it comes across as preaching to people who have really done a lot, that, you know, it's almost like not acknowledging it. But that's what underlies it when you really look carefully at it. And there's some good reporters in the state that understand it thoroughly. It's not a pretty picture moving forward. And again, the biology of, we can only look, you can take your front yard and your backyard at your house, and you can reduce your water consumption by simply replacing everything with California-friendly, drought-tolerant species. You can't do that on a golf course. At the end of the day, we can reduce the amount of turf we play on, but we play on turf. And the biology of turf is that it has a 100% evapotranspiration factor, which means it doesn't retain water. It's not cactus. And so if we could play on something else, we could do the switch out. And this is something that I sometimes think maybe the Natural Resources Defense Council doesn't understand that, but that's not correct. They're smart. They understand that, but they don't care. Because their attitude is if grass is the only thing you play on, and grass isn't going to be part of California's future, then, you know, and what the market's telling you, golf, is that you were wonderful in the past, but you're not going to be wonderful in the future. You're going to shrink. I don't think we find that acceptable. And fighting against it is probably not the wisest strategy, but working with it, a little bit of the way we worked with the Assembly Bill 1346 that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, there might be some wisdom in that. So let's switch to what I think is our final slide. I'm not used to doing slides. I'm used to just speaking extemporaneously. I've saved this one for last because everything I said, and I put this little phrase up there that I used in a magazine article. It's going to piss you off, but it should. Too much land that uses too much water to serve the too few who have received too much for too long. By the way, if that makes you mad, it should, because it's a caricature. It's unfair to the golf industry, but you need to understand something. That's what Christina Garcia thinks about us. That's what too many people think about us. And as long as they think that, it doesn't matter what the facts are. What matters is that perception. And that perception is behind 672. That perception is behind all of the things that ail us. And at the end of the day, it isn't just the reality of the biological factor of water. It is the reality that when you drive through an urban packed area, again, what's insidious about 672 that I didn't mention, that every poll of every place in California, whether it's part of California that voted for Donald Trump or a part of California that voted for Joe Biden by 90%, whether it's rural, agricultural, the desert, the sea, Eureka, San Diego, Blythe, it doesn't matter where you go, it doesn't matter which demographic you poll, housing is the #1 problem in every poll of every sector of California. And 672 purports to be a housing bill. Connect those two dots, and that's why it's so insidiously dangerous unless we point these things out. And you drive through packed urban areas, and you go by, and there's 150 or 70 or 180 acres, and if it's got it's in a place that's desperately short of housing and may also be short of soccer fields and some other things, that some think, because they have a view of golf, that it's not played. It doesn't look like California. It's, you know, the drill. It's too old. It's too this. It's too rich. It's too everything, which is all. None of that's true, but that doesn't really matter if people believe that, and it doesn't really matter. And people will believe what they will believe, and they will only believe something different if they're told something different. It's golf's obligation to tell that story, and not to each other, not in webinars like this, but to project that out to the world like every other sector does. Now, I understanding that the golf industry, just for most of our history, we didn't have to do this. We grew. We were the darlings. We were actually the left side of the political aisle was one of, for 50, 60 years, was our greatest proponent. Now they're not so much our greatest proponent, in fact, quite the opposite. So recognizing that this forms an existential challenge because all these things are related, whether it's, and it's all related to the fact that I've often said that if we were bocce ball, which takes almost no space, no one would care who we are, what we do, or how we do it. But because you can see it, and because it can be green during a drought, and because there's a sense that you drive by a golf course and it look, you know, we know that if you've got a group on the green, a group in the fairway, and a group on the tee, it's over. It's actually too crowded. It's going to be a slow round of golf. But if you look at the acreage, what served us so well in COVID is that we put only 1.1 persons per acre of open space, and that got us back to playing golf. It also put us in trouble on what I would call these existential challenges, because people look at that as why are we dedicating, in this case, that much public land, and it uses all that water, and the people who play it are the pampered few who we don't really like anyway. And again, as I point out, if, for example, in the city of Los Angeles did the utilization study, the truth is that golf is more utilized. However, we use 140 or 50 acres to do it. A tennis court doesn't use much. Most of the other things don't. Yes, there's some things that do use a lot of property, like trail systems, but they're more generally open to the public, maybe equestrian, but no one sees those things. But you drive by in urban California and you see these golf courses, and they're just big, fat targets. And I think I put on here, I'm reading my own bullet here, as long as that view is held by too many, golf will have great difficulty defending its interests in the public interest, in the public arena. And I might point out, we will be constantly defending, you know, as much as I think, you know, in a sense, and I'm told we did a video at the SCGA too about municipal golf that will go live here in a couple of days. So as much as I think I've been impressed by the SCGA's ability to do this campaign, I hope others have been as well. At the end of the day, it's still a reactive campaign. So we are reacting to other people setting the agenda. We are not on offense. And offense doesn't mean attacking people or being aggressive. Offense means getting your story and telling it loudly, and telling it to the 90% of the population that doesn't play golf, because they're going to decide our fate, not the 10% who do. Yes, the USGA will write the rules and we'll handle our own game, but that's not the point here. It's others and others' view of us. And like I said, and I'll read that line again, and if it makes you angry, good, because you need to understand that's what way too much of the population thinks about us, which is why when a poor guy like me ends up in a Sacramento hearing room or a hearing before a board of supervisors or a city council or a planning commission, the people up there, many of them think that what they think I'm representing is a bunch of people, that it's too much land, that uses too much water to serve the too few who have received too much for too long, and they want to give us a haircut. So how do you think it's going to go for us? And this is sort of, before I open it up for some questions, I think I'm pretty much on time. And I'm told that I didn't make the mistake that a lot of people do when they use slides, is that they run out of time before they run out of slides. But that what this game needs, and we can go to the last slide now, which I think is the closing one, because I promised to be sort of on time. There it is. That's how you can get in touch with me. By the way, a new title now, Public Affairs. I don't think it came with a pay raise, but it's a new title. And I think that was a determination by the board of the SCGA that Kevin Fitzgerald and I do so much more. After this presentation, which has been totally political, we do a whole lot more in what I would call things that are more generally public. In fact, my last plea, and I've been spent the last year on doing something with the USGA, which will become public in the first quarter of this year, and I'm very happy about it, encouraged by it. But what it amounts to is this understanding that advocacy for the game of golf goes much more to the last point I made about meeting existential challenges, developing good stories, telling those stories, and finding ways to tell those stories, not at our meetings, but telling those stories in the public arena, telling those stories to the people who don't play golf. Because at the end of the day, the degree to which ordinary citizens who are not the least bit interested in ever playing golf drive by that golf course, whether it's private, daily fee, or a municipal course. And if it's municipal, they feel like they own it. It's part of their park system. When they drive by, if they're never interested in stepping on and hitting a golf shot, we want them knowing that that is an asset to their community, just as other public spaces are assets to their community. Not about the too few have too much for too long and use too much water, but assets to the community. With the societal value proposition of a golf course is positive, in all kinds of respects, social and environmental and every other thing. If they believe that, we won't be on the defensive with most things. We'll be able to be proactive. And that's more important than meeting with legislators about gas-powered bills and coming up with a rebate program and some softer landings therein. Yes, that everyone thinks that, yes, that's part of it. That's the much less important part. The important part is that golf had it good for so long, particularly after World War II. We had great winds at our back for 60 years. We didn't have to do these things. We didn't have to tell any story because developers moved us on, the housing industry moved us on, all political sectors moved us on, and we just kept growing and growing and growing. And we probably became complacent, unlike some other sectors that recognize they need to tell their story and they need to up their game among those who will be making decisions who don't come from their communities and aren't going to be sad if golf goes away or if they'll fill in the blank something else. And that's probably the most important thing going forward. I'd call it a public relations campaign, but it's that's too surface and facile. It's much deeper than that. It requires, it's going to take resources. Everything does. Golf's never had to dedicate resources in that area because we grew without having to do it. So why would we do it? But we're not going to continue to grow. We're not going to continue to be able to meet those challenges unless we sit down as an organization and get all of them together and recognize we need to dedicate some resources to the most important point of advocacy. And that'll be my last point, which is telling a story about what we do and how we do it so that people who never step on a golf course drive by and say, I want to keep that thing because it's good for me and it's good for my family and it's good for my community. They don't think that right now. We need to convince them to think that. And I promise that be my last point. And I think I'm pretty near the end of my time. So I'm going to keep that promise. And that was my last point. And I'll thank everyone again for inviting me to come on. And I talked a mile a minute, I think, probably a little too fast and a lot of it escaped some of the attention. But anyway, thank you, John. And if I raised any questions, refer them to my people. I'm just kidding.
You did. Fantastic, Craig. In your opinion, the battle on 672, where are we in that fight? Are we losing? Are we winning? Does it stand a pretty good chance to get shot down? Has the response or the call to arms from PGA professionals and golf enthusiasts abroad to write letters and make a voice, or where are we in that whole thing?
Excellent question. Where we are is the response is, particularly for the golf, has been good. That's a good start. I want to indicate that for a bill to become a law, it has to go through a lot of steps. It may pass step 1, step 2, and that's next week at committee hearings. And sometimes things pass through committees as courtesies to the author. You may owe the author some favors. You may want the author's support on some other things. So you pass it through. That doesn't mean it'll go through the floor. It has to go through a lot of the steps. It has to go through 2 committees in the assembly, and then it has to go to appropriations in the assembly. And that's, otherwise known as the committee where bills go to die, because now we're talking about money. And this one definitely talks about money. It's an open-ended commitment. And then it needs to go to the floor. And even if it makes it there, it then goes to the other house for a longer period of time. And it usually gets more scrutiny there because those legislators don't owe favors and don't have relationships with the legislators in the other body necessarily. So none of that factors into it. Then it has to go through those committees. It has to go through that appropriations process. And then after that, it's still, if it passes both and they coordinate them and both houses pass the same bill, it still goes to the governor. And governors veto a substantial number of bills. So there's a long way. And I'm going through that because I don't want anyone to get their dauber down because it goes through one or two of these steps initially. Most bills do not become law. This one on its face is rather peculiar. And I think it's becoming more and more apparent. This is a developer's bill, not a housing bill. There are legislators who are very serious about public policy and serious about housing. One of the reasons this bill didn't make it onto the docket last year of the Housing Committees was chaired by David Chu of San Francisco, who's resigned his seat to become city attorney in San Francisco. But he was a serious policy guy, and I think he looked at this as not serious housing policy and didn't want to waste his time. He wanted to get other things done, and the legislature was controversial, but did produce some rather significant housing bills. This would not be significant housing bill. I mean, when you look very carefully at the details, and that's why I call it a developer's bill, you have to have an agreement. You have to have an agency. You still have to go through the CEQA process and everything else. The odds of too many end up being chopped up by this are not good. So if you're a housing advocate, you're looking at, is this really worth it? Now, if you're getting some emails, just a few hundred from constituents, is it worth upsetting people over with nothing in exchange? If you get 600,000 housing units, yes, they'll make that calculation. So that's what we're working into. I think there was some question when SCGA decided to hit this thing before the session started, that why don't we wait until? I'm more convinced, even I thought, well, this is kind of a strange thing, but I think we're approaching this as if it's going to be a long slog. If it ends next week or 2 or 3 weeks from now, believe me, I couldn't be happier. But we've set the stage for the longer haul, because there's nothing worse than depending on everything in one particular point, expending all your ammunition, and then it goes forward to the next step and you've got nothing. So we think we have something good in place. And I hope that answered your question. And the real answer was, who knows? That was an awful long answer to say, I don't know. I know that, but
that was great. Craig, thank you very much. On behalf of the Education Committee for the Southern California PGA, we want to thank you for your time and coming on the Catalyst webinar and sharing your expertise. For those that are accessing this webinar after the fact, there will be a 10-question quiz that you'll need to take and earn a score of 70% or higher to earn 1 MSR for attending this morning's Catalyst. For those that are on the live webcast, you'll receive 1 MSR credit automatically for attending this morning's webcast. Mr. Kessler, always a pleasure. Thank you very much, sir, for taking the time to come on the Catalyst webinar this morning. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, John.
Thanks.